and decided to move out to farms, and they stayed there, especially in Vermont. They stayed maybe for one winter, and then headed back to a place that was a little bit easier to make a living. But some of them did stick around, and some of those farms are still going today. So a few more things about what's happening with our New England food system today. Only 5% of the land in New England is actually producing food. And you might remember in the previous chart it said 4 million, a little over 4 million acres in farmland. Well, not all of that farmland is actually producing food. That's 4 million acres in farms, but only about a little under 2 million acres are actually producing food in New England. However, our agricultural footprint, the amount of land that it takes to produce all the food that we consume, is 16 million acres. So less than 2 million acres in production, 16 million acres that are required to feed us. So obviously we're getting that food from somewhere else. And as it works out, at least 90% of New England's food comes from outside the region. Despite having a lot of great farmland, 10 to 16% of people in New England don't have reliable access to enough food for a healthy, active life. That's called food security, and there's a range there because it depends on the state you're in. Massachusetts is doing relatively well. Vermont is doing relatively well. Some of the other states are not doing very well at all. And if you look at households with children, those numbers are even worse. In some states in New England, 1 in 5 children comes from a food insecure household. And that's really bad because early food insecurity has lasting effects through life. New Englanders, in addition to a lot of them being food insecure, we're not eating the right things. We eat far too much fatty food, far too much salty food, far too much meat. Some of you may love eating meat, but we eat too much of it in this country. Here's a chart that shows, as of 2014, where we stand on consumption of fruits and vegetables. And the first bar in each set is 1970, so it's comparing 1970 to 2014. As you can see, the amount of fruit, the brown bars over there, it's gone up, that's good, but a whole lot of that is fruit juice. So we're drinking a lot of fruit juice, and that doesn't have nearly the same benefits that eating fresh fruit has. You aren't getting the fiber, you aren't getting that sense of fullness that you get by eating fresh fruit. So people can drink a lot of fruit juice and then go out and eat too much food and be putting on weight because they're getting too much fruit juice. And fruit juice is also pretty sugary. It's natural sugars, but it's not something that you want to be feeding your kids all the time, which I didn't realize when my kids were little. I gave them those little juicy juice boxes too much. Vegetable consumption has gone up slightly, but not nearly enough, and that's where we really fall down. USDA says we should be eating 3 cups of fruits and vegetables every day. The Harvard School of Public Health has a different set of dietary standards, and I believe that they advise 10 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. Very, very few people in our society are eating that many fruits and vegetables. It helps if you have a beautiful farm, if you've got a CSA. CSAs are definitely associated with eating more vegetables. That's one of the good things about membership in a CSA. And they're actually doctors who give prescriptions to people to participate in a CSA. They're called veggie prescriptions because it can really help. People who are obese or who are moving in that direction, or people with diabetes, eating more fruits and vegetables is a very positive thing and one of the best things you can do for your body. Dairy, as you can see, the bright blue line at the bottom is cheese. We love cheese in this country, and we are eating more and more cheese. We're eating a little less fluid, drinking a little less fluid milk, but definitely making up for it with cheese and yogurt. So that's where we are with consumption right now on the things that make a big difference in health. Because our consumption patterns are so poor in this country, diet-related diseases have just surged. Things like diabetes, heart disease, 6 of the major killers in this country, the 10 most frequent causes of death in this country, are diet-related, 6 of them. So you would think that we would be paying a lot more attention and providing federal funds to farm education programs that are teaching kids how to eat the right thing, how to love eating vegetables. But we're not quite there yet. We aren't that foresighted. So the chart at the top, I know you can't see any of the text. And these charts, by the way, are from my state. They're from the Vermont farm to plate food strategy, really wonderful statewide strategy of what people in Vermont decided they want our food system to look like in the future. The pictures, the lines on the top are showing the percent of people who are at the correct weight, who are neither overweight nor obese. And as you can see, that percentage is going down. And then on the bottom, we see the percentage that's actually obese. And this is a little bit, Scott, the fellow who put these charts together, cheated just a tiny bit. But the brown line on the top and the brown line on the bottom is actually Louisiana, which is about the worst. So that's not a New England state. If you're wondering, well, what's that state that really jumps out as having such a higher proportion of obese people than the other states? But even New England, which is relatively healthy, Vermont has been either the healthiest or next to healthiest state overall, judging by these indices that folks put together. But even in Vermont, the trends are still going in the wrong direction. So, because of all these things, we need a vision. We need to do things differently. And we need to transform that food system so it is providing healthy food for everyone, for low-income people, for food insecure people. Food insecurity should be a thing of the past. We are wealthy enough in this country that no one in this country should have to go without food because of poverty, and we aren't there yet. These are the guiding values: healthy food for all, sustainable farming and fishing, and thriving communities. Those were the values that underpinned the development of the vision. And then we realized in Food Solutions New England, as we started working with this vision, we are not going to change the food system until we secure food justice. So we added racial equity and food justice as another guiding vision. You may know that people of color in every state have much worse diet-related disease outcomes, prevalence, than whites. So that's a problem throughout. And we have plenty of pockets of low-income people, people of color in Boston, in Connecticut, in every state really, who are not getting healthy diets. So we added that as one of our primary values. We tinkered with the diet in this New England food system. We ended up with 3 different scenarios. We started with where we are now, and that's the chart over on the far left. That's what we eat now. And then we worked toward what we call the omnivore's delight. That's the middle diagram. That's a different diet. If you notice, and one of the advantages of being strapped to a mic is I can move around. Meat there shrinks down a little bit at number 7 in the current diet. Way too much meat in our current diet. It has shrunk down somewhat in the omnivore's delight. And in this diagram, which is a scenario that we could adopt if we need to rely on the region far more than we're relying on it now for our food. the amount of meat that we eat has shrunk down even more. Some other changes that you'll see between these is number 9, that kind of green gloppy stuff on the far left side. Those are fats and oils, and that has shrunk down in Omnivore's Delight much closer to what we should be eating. We eat too much fat, and that's one of the causes of obesity. Too much fat and too many sugar-sweetened beverages. Hello. So these were the assumptions that we worked with in the Omnivore's Delight diet. We were assuming, and we use this as our assumption. By the way, Kim, could I get some water? It would help. Thanks. We assumed that population would continue to grow slowly. We're at about 15 million now in New England, and we assumed that it would grow to about 17 million by 2060. In Omnivore's Delight, we were assuming that instead of the kind of sprawl that we're seeing in many places, like along Route 9, that there would be a real commitment to clustered green development. Thanks, Kim.
No problem.
We also assumed, and this is a major change, we assumed that the amount of land that is being farmed would increase threefold. And you might say, oh, that's never going to happen. That's completely impossible. But actually, that would mean just going back to the kind of landscapes that we had in New England in the middle of the 1900s. It wouldn't be that radical a change. Most of that land that we are talking about putting back into farmland used to be farmland back in 1910, middle of the 1900s. And then, as it went out of farmland, it grew up into scrubby secondary growth. So we're not talking about cutting down prime forest land. And if development is clustered, then we can still have some new development for these extra 2 million people who are moving into the region, but increase the amount of farmland. It would actually be a beautiful landscape. And very similar, one of the inspirations for the vision, Brian Donahue and Russell Libby went to Spinocchia in Italy. I'm not sure if anybody here has ever been to Tuscany. Anybody been there? Just beautiful landscapes. And when you look out over the Tuscan landscapes, you see farms. We would have a landscape that looks far more like that instead of what we have now. So it would be beautiful. We would also be seeing healthier average diets, as I showed you in the previous slide, that would still be following the USDA MyPlate recommendations: less meat, fewer calories, the same amount of dairy as we eat today, but a lot more fruits and vegetables. We would have stronger environmental commitments. We would have a real commitment to reducing our carbon footprint. One of the ways we can do that is through sustainable farming. Sustainable agriculture, agroecology. These are practices that sequester carbon in the soil instead of releasing it. I know you have a talk on agroforestry coming up as part of this series. And agroforestry is one of those agroecological practices that is really exemplary for sequestering carbon in the soil. And that is exactly what we need to start doing. There's a new study that just came out by Jim Hansen. The name might be familiar to folks. He used to work for NOAA. He was really the first person who raised public awareness about climate change. Really a fabulous speaker. I was able to hear him at the American Association of Geographers just this past spring. And he came out with a new report that said, not only do we need to stop emitting carbon, but we need to go full force ahead with sequestering carbon. We need to be sucking that carbon out of the air and out of the oceans. We don't exactly know how to do it and how to do it quickly and cheaply, but we've got to focus on that fast. We would also have a strong regional commitment to environmental protection overall, which also feeds into supporting more sustainable farming, like the organic farming that's practiced at this farm. And not just sustainable farming, but also sustainable fisheries. Our oceans are sad. In Maine, I was part of a community-supported fishery for a while that's a little bit like a community-supported agriculture. The community-supported fishery closed down after its second year in Bar Harbor because there was nothing out there anymore except lobster. And you might say, oh, lobster, that'd be wonderful. But lobsters are kind of the scavengers of the bottom. The fact that there are only lobsters out there and that all the ground fish that used to be fished off of Maine were gone, that's a really serious sign. And Maine used to have canneries. It used to be really a source of a lot of fish that were being eaten all around the region. And finally, the Omnivore's Delight assumes that as a region, we would be committed to the right to healthy food and nutrition, access to healthy food for all as a human right, not something that you get only if you have enough money to pay for it, but a basic human right. So in Omnivore's Delight, our agricultural footprint has dropped down for 17 million people. It was 16 million acres for business as usual, our current picture, and now it's down to 12 million acres, and New England grown can make up 50% of that agricultural footprint. We could be growing all of our vegetables if we increase the amount of farmland we have. We could be growing 50% of our fruit, a lot of the fruit that we really like, the exotic fruits, mangoes, they're never going to grow in New England, or not unless climate change gets a lot worse. Dairy, 100%, we'd need to be importing a little bit of feed grain. Beef, 100%, same thing about feed grain. Other meat and eggs, we could grow all of that in New England. We don't have to be bringing in pork or eggs from other regions. Grains and beans in the Omnivore's Delight scenario would continue to be grown in the Midwest. And as we started developing this vision, it went through about 3 years of vetting. We have these food summits that Food Solutions New England puts on in different states each year. And people would say, well, we should just grow all of our food. We should just rip up all the lawns and grow all of our food in New England. But we really can't. Not for the population that we have or the population that we expect by the year 2060. Even with 3 times as much farmland in production than what we have now, we would still only be able to raise 20% of our grain and beans. But we could be bringing it by train from the Midwest. Trains are pretty good as far as greenhouse gas emissions go. They're pretty efficient, and the Midwest can grow grains and beans so much better than we can here. So we may as well continue to import what they can grow very well and grow what we can grow really well in New England, which is meat, dairy. We're very well suited for that. And if the oceans were restored through more sustainable practices, we could be eating 2.7 ounces of fish per week per person, which might not seem like much, but that's a lot better than we are able to eat now from New England fisheries. Okay, if we move on to that far scenario, the one where I said, if things get really bad and we need to hunker down and just rely on what we can raise ourselves here because the supply chains are broken down, maybe there's social upheaval, who knows what's going to happen over the next few decades. I know everybody carries around this